been given war-making powers, and by the way, is being regularly protested right next door to Dick Cheney's house, mentioned earlier. Special forces are operating in more countries. A new form of war waged with drones has been taken into new nations without any say from Congress or the UN or we the people. The Pentagon is moving into Africa in a major way. And when we spend $1 trillion a year on war preparations through various government departments, it's a banker bailout we never get back. Inequality of wealth in this country has been growing under Obama even faster than under Bush. The super profitable, super corrupt, and super unaccountable war industry is part of the reason why. Any one of the 10 richest people in this country could set aside his income for a single year and buy housing for every person in this country who doesn't have a house. The poorest 47% of Americans owns less than nothing. The poorest 62% of Americans owns less than the richest 400 people. Only 3 nations on earth are more unequal than the land of the free and the home of the suckered. The Wall Street crash reduced median wealth 66% for Latinos and 53% for African Americans. Dr. King said if we continue to spend more on war than on programs of social uplift, we would approach spiritual death. The question now, these many years and wars later, is whether we can manage spiritual resurrection. To do so, we'll need unity. We cannot lack understanding for the student who goes into the military in order to become a dentist. We must appreciate the economic bind that we've all been put in. But that doesn't mean it's wise to oppose cuts to Social Security by hyping the supposed service that veterans have done for us in wars. For one thing, just stop and consider where all the money is going that could lower the retirement age rather than increasing it. It's going to billionaires and a war machine. Glorifying the war machine may not be a smart way to change that. President Kennedy once wrote that war would continue until the conscientious objector had the prestige and the honor that the soldier has. Of course, soldiers would have to lose prestige as conscientious objectors and other resistors gained. The two cannot be honorable together. But opposing participation in the military is not the same thing as condemning any person who has done it. Most do it for economic, among other reasons. I'm proud to be an associate, non-veteran member of Veterans for Peace. We also must separate the sin from the sinner when we consider employment in the weapons industry. When Congress funds a war machine that builds momentum for war and does so for the stated reason of creating jobs, that's sociopathic. When someone with a family to feed takes one of those jobs, that's often a matter of survival. When the state of Maryland, even while banning the death penalty, and there's something good to cheer for, forces Montgomery County to give millions of dollars to Lockheed Martin, then that's pure corruption. But Lockheed's employees can't be expected to all quit today without alternative employment. Our goal should be economic conversion, from making weapons to making windmills and every other useful object. Bills to begin coordinating this at the national level made progress in Congress in the 60s, 70s, 80s, but haven't been heard of in years. One opportunity to begin this at the local level is anywhere that war jobs are actually being lost during the much exaggerated current cuts. Localities and states are starting to create commissions to lobby for more war money. Instead, they should be studying the advantages of conversion. Advantages which include more and better paying jobs, significantly so according to a study from the University of Massachusetts. The labor movement, which has been rather weak on opposing wars for many years in this country, should be opposing war spending even for purely economic reasons. Even tax cuts for working people produces more jobs than military spending. The only way you can cut military spending and get fewer jobs is if you give the money to that crowd we call the job creators. Another advantage is, of course, safety. The Department of Defense endangers us. Defunding it is in fact in the interests of what they call national security. But there are many more advantages. Civil liberties groups have done heroic work in this country in recent years, opposing warrantless spying, lawless imprisonment, torture, assassination, and other atrocities generated by military spending. These groups ought to heed Eisenhower's warning and oppose the root of the problem. Some of them are not just refraining from opposing war spending, they're actually supporting wars. even while opposing various evils that wars involve. We need to work on this with people concerned about civil liberties. When we recently passed a resolution against drones in Charlottesville, Virginia, it opened up a discussion about drone use abroad as well. I recommend doing that. I'll be glad to talk with you about how we did it. Also, please be at a U.S. Senate hearing on drones a week from Tuesday morning, if you can. The School of the Americas Watch has not shut down the school, but has persuaded various nations to stop sending students to be trained in torture and murder at Fort Benning, Georgia. Sometimes our best allies are abroad. Powerful movements against U.S. military bases in the Philippines, Puerto Rico, South Korea, Italy, and elsewhere need our help, as we need theirs. The torture techniques used by our death squads and proxies abroad are also developed in U.S. prisons. We lead the world in weapons sales, war spending, and incarceration, and these are connected. Taking on the prison industrial complex and the military industrial complex together is the most likely way for us to take on militarism, racism, and extreme materialism without dividing our strength. Gun control should be holistic and international. While the NRA and the White House debate local gun restrictions, they join hands to oppose international ones. But selling weapons to the world, against some of which U.S. soldiers will certainly later fight, spreads the idea of righteous violence. Peace activists should work for gun control at home, but should take the opportunity to make people more aware of U.S. weapons sales abroad and of the kind of governments they're sold to. Fox News' Sean Hannity says it's okay for basketball coaches to hit players because, quote, "My father hit me with a belt and I turned out okay." I suppose we can each judge for ourselves how he turned out. Violence in any aspect of our lives can help to legitimate it in others. Hannity has not distinguished himself as an opponent of wars. Maybe if he'd gone to peace camp in Cheverly, Maryland, we'd all be better off. Environmental groups have largely, but not entirely, shied away from opposing our greatest consumer of oil, a machine that fights wars for oil and uses the oil to fight wars, poisoning our nation and others with chemicals and radiation to an extent that would rank such abuses above 9/11 or Pearl Harbor if foreigners were responsible. The anti-basis movement is slowly making connections, as in Jeju Island, South Korea, between environmental activism and peace activism. Such alliances can only make us stronger. Immigrants' rights can sometimes be thought of as refugee rights. Little produces immigration the way wars do. And denying rights to people whose country your own military has ravaged is beyond the rudeness of most people, once made aware of it. Immigrants' rights and peace are causes that must unite. Education and housing and green energy infrastructure advocates for all good programs, have two possible sources of funding. We can tax the plutocrats, or we can scale back a war machine currently as large as the rest of the world's combined. Practically speaking, we will have to do both. The war machine generates plutocrats and vice versa. About half of our tax dollars on Monday will go to war funding. There are funds that you can put that money into instead of paying your taxes, an approach that some of you might want to investigate. The Pentagon just announced that it went $10 billion over budget on killing children in Afghanistan. Oops. Meanwhile, Congress has manufactured the pretense that the U.S. Postal Service is billions of dollars in the hole. We are a nation that can afford services we don't dare imagine, and our government still hopes to privatize the post office. Instead of having no mail on Saturdays, I, for one, would prefer no wars on Saturdays. The military-industrial complex is everything Eisenhower feared and then some. But if every interest group and individual for whom it is a major stumbling block were to unite against it and in favor of conversion to a peace economy, the Pentagon's walls would come crumbling down. Opposing militarism is not a separate little campaign, but ought to be part of a comprehensive plan for justice. Instead of shouting jobs, not cuts, we should be demanding cuts to the military and to highways and to banks and to corporate welfare and expanding investment in all the things we want and the things we don't dare dream of but can easily afford. By direct democracy, Americans would reduce military spending right now. No persuasion is needed. But a movement of dedicated activists intent on enacting a major conversion program will require stronger and deeper public opinion than now exists. We're up against the belief in the possibility of a good war and myths about past wars being good and just. We have to correct those myths and point out the altered state of the world that makes them unhelpful anyway. Weaponry, communications, and understanding of the tools of nonviolence have changed. War is no longer useful, even if you imagine it ever was. What we need is a movement for the abolition of war. And one place to look for inspiration might be the original abolitionists, Thomas Clarkson and Olaudah Equiano, and those who launched a movement that built pressure to end the British slave trade and slavery. A movement that gained, of course, from rebellions by those enslaved in Jamaica and what we call Haiti. If you're like me, there are some things you would like to abolish. My list includes weapons, fossil fuel use, plutocracy, corporate personhood, corporate nationhood, health insurance corporations, poverty wages, poverty, homelessness, factory farming, prisons, the drug war, the death penalty, nuclear energy, the United States Senate, the Electoral College, gerrymandering, electronic voting machines, murder, rape, child abuse, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, the Washington Post. I mean, I could go on. I bet you can think of at least one institution you believe we'd be better off without. I put war around the top of the list. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries in England, activists invented committees with chapters and newsletters, posters, speaking tours, book tours, petitioning, boycotts, theatrical props, investigative journalism. Most people could not vote, and voting had nothing to do with it. Slavery was the norm across the world, and activists faced defeat after defeat for years. But they did not quit. They demanded rights, and not for themselves, but for others, unlike them, and for the most part unseen by them. Britons were familiar with having their sons kidnapped and enslaved by the British Navy, but they applied that understanding to others in other circumstances. We can do the same. We can see disasters in New Orleans and New York, and we can begin to see them in Baghdad and Kabul. Frederick Douglass went to England and met with Clarkson. Douglass worked for the abolition of slavery here, but he later remarked, "When I ran away from slavery, it was for myself. When I advocated emancipation, it was for my people. But when I stood up for the rights of woman, self was out of the question, and I found a little nobility in the act." Perhaps we too can act on behalf of others. Perhaps we can expand concern for U.S. citizens killed by drones to human beings killed by drones. Douglass also said this, "War is among the greatest calamities incident to the lives of nations. They arrest the progress of civilization, corrupt the sources of morality, destroy all proper sense of the sacredness of human life, perpetuate the national hate, and weigh down the necks of after-coming generations with the burdens of debt." When Britain and France went to war, the anti-slavery movement stalled. When the global war on the globe started, progressive movements in the United States stalled. The idea that North Korea will kill us all aids the idea that we should cut Social Security and get started on killing ourselves. Permanent war means a permanent impediment to progress. We have the power to abolish war and to put $1 trillion a year to better use. "And these words shall then become," wrote Percy Bysshe Shelley, "like oppression's thundered doom, ringing through each heart and brain, and heard again, 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 rise, like lions after slumber in unvanquishable number, shake your chains to earth like dew, which in sleep had fallen on you. Ye are many, they are few." Enough time for questions and answers, did I?
Have 5 minutes.
Yes, yes.
Anybody have a question, statement, short rant?
Well, thank you so much. You're a brave man, David Swanson.
I said short rant.
Yeah, David and I differ on this. I say that we're ignoring all the people who are really worried about foreign people who would attack us when we don't look at the evidence that Arab and Muslim people are not the culprits for 9/11. Dave's actually mellowed on this, and he's a friend. But the peace movement nationally will not look at this question. I'm with Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, And our video, Experts Speak Out, is the most viewed and most shared video nationally on PBS for several weeks last September. Please come talk to me.
So that was a pretty short rant. Thank you, Dave. And I would say that absolutely nobody needs to stop being friends because they disagree on anything, and absolutely nobody reasonable or dedicated to peace suggests that the Arab and Muslim people are responsible for anything. I mean, a handful of criminals committing a crime is not grounds for war. This is the major mistake. Regardless of which handful of people you think committed that crime and which handful of people I think committed that crime, it was a crime to be prosecuted as such, not grounds to bomb a nation of people who'd never heard of it.
Yeah.
Yes?
Since the United States and Israel seem to be joined at the hip, I'm going to suggest that maybe a lot of the problem that we have in the Middle East now is attributable to this binding together. Because Israel has said from the outset that they want to weaken all the countries surrounding them, and they've been doing pretty well, don't you think? And now they've weakened Iraq, certainly. Lebanon is a mess. They want to get to Iran. Do you see any connection there, or am I going overboard?
Did everybody hear the question?
No.
It's essentially the Israel question. What in the world is the problem with Israel? And I would just say that, again, as with the last question, we need to distinguish the government of Israel from the people of Israel, among whom there are some wonderful dissenters. But certainly there is a problem with the idea that the only democracy in the Middle East, that the only nation we should defend in the Middle East is also a nation set up with rights for people of a particular religion, a nuclear power outside of the rule of law, and a nation engaged in an illegal occupation for decades, apparently modeled on our own genocide of the natives of this country. And we do need to start thinking about it very differently, and thankfully young people are. Yes, you're not off track at all. That can't be all the questions, can it? Maybe